The United States has been negotiating with Hamas directly, talking about an end to the war and a long-term ceasefire between Israel and the organization. What do we know about this potential deal? Where do things stand currently in the war? What does Israel have to say about these negotiations? I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Sunday, March 9th, the U.S. Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Adam Boehler, gave several different interviews about the direct negotiations the United States has been holding with Hamas over the last several weeks. Addressing the many rumors about what these negotiations may be including, Boehler surprised commentators by stating that the United States is not only negotiating for all hostages rather than only the American citizens that are in captivity, but also that the United States is effectively bypassing Israel and is negotiating with Hamas terms for an elongated ceasefire and an end to the war between Israel and the organization. It's important to note that Boehler spoke to CNN, Fox News, as well as to Israel's Kan News network, and while he said slightly different things in each of these interviews, what I'm reporting here is a synthesis of the main points that he brought up in each of these different news outlets. Boehler began by confirming that the United States is talking to Hamas about a range of issues far beyond the release of American hostages, stating that the discussions include the release of all hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, as well as the possible terms for an end to the war and a complete ceasefire between the sides. Boehler rejected allegations that it is unprecedented that the United States is negotiating with a terror organization, stated that the Trump administration would like to see peace in the region, and that the Trump administration is willing to talk to anyone about what may bring calm to this area. He added that talking to terrorists does not mean condoning their actions or liking them, and he also stated that, quote, some of Hamas's terms are in fact quite reasonable, end quote. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say this is not the first time that a Trump administration has broken the taboo and held direct talks with a declared terror organization. At the end of Trump's first term in office, the United States held direct talks with the Taliban, signing an agreement with the group which included the release of thousands of Taliban fighters who were later instrumental in the Taliban's taking over of Afghanistan. Regarding the terms that are being discussed, Boehler stated that beyond the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners, in the direct talks with Hamas, the group proposed a long-term ceasefire between Israel and the organization that would last between 5 to 10 years. As part of the ceasefire, Hamas agreed to lay down arms. In one of his interviews, Boehler used the explicit term that Hamas would disarm. He also stated that Hamas would agree to not take part in a future governing of the Gaza Strip. Again, in a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that when it comes to terror organizations, the distinction between laying down arms and disarming is in fact quite important. Laying down arms often means stopping fighting and returning to a diplomatic channel, while disarming means turning over your weapons such that you cannot engage in active fighting later on if negotiations or a diplomatic channel ends up breaking down. So the fact that in some of his interviews Boehler said laying down arms, and in some of his interviews he said disarming, may be instrumental with regards to what the deal actually includes. Over the past several weeks, in response to Israel's demands for a demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, i.e. a disarming of the group by turning over its weapons, several Hamas officials, including the group's spokesperson Hazem Qassem, as well as Osama Hamdan, categorically rejected the idea that the group would disarm itself, i.e. again, that the group would give up its arms. I will say, however, that several of them did publicly state that the group would be willing to relinquish political control of the Gaza Strip and not take an active part in the future administration of the Gaza Strip, i.e. while the group is denying what some of the things that Boehler is saying it agreed to, it is agreeing to the other facets, specifically those political facets of taking part in the future governing administration of the Gaza Strip. Continuing to unpack the prospective deal that Boehler was talking about, Boehler stated that rebuilding Gaza was part of Hamas's demands, and this was tied also to the group's agreeing to not take part in a future Gaza administration. He also added that Hamas was willing to have the United States and other countries to be part of a team that would ensure that no more tunnels were being constructed in the Gaza Strip. That is one of the things that the Trump administration has referred several times, the tunnels that were constructed in Gaza as part of what the group was investing in as opposed to rebuilding and reconstructing the Gaza Strip. Now, turning to what Israel and Hamas are saying about these ongoing negotiations, the Israeli government has so far officially kept relatively quiet about this channel between the United States and Hamas. Reports have emerged in Israel's Channel 13 stating that the Israeli government is absolutely enraged about these direct negotiations, and that despite internal pressures, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is also aware that Israel has little to no wiggle room when it comes to open confrontation with the Trump administration about these ongoing negotiations. Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, who I'll say is also one of the closest confidants of Prime Minister Netanyahu, had a reported phone call with Adam Boehler in which he, according to different reports, was shouting at the end of it and stating that Israel has been effectively sidelined from the negotiations. In addition to that, senior Israeli officials, which is usually a code name for the Prime Minister's office, have also been leaking to the Israeli media that the U.S. negotiations have failed and that the United States is not advancing in this route. Boehler himself, in those different interviews, was asked about this, and he stated that he did in fact have a heated conversation with Minister Ron Dermer, and that he understands Israel's concerns, but he also said that the United States is not an Israeli agent, that it has its own array of considerations when it comes to bringing peace and calm to this region. Israel has agreed to the United States' request and is sending a delegation to Doha in Qatar in order to continue negotiations on the implementation of the ceasefire. This is supposed to start on Monday. The country is reportedly hoping that a much smaller deal will be agreed upon, enabling the release of several different hostages on the one hand, but a return to fighting at the end of the Muslim and Jewish holidays of Ramadan and Passover that will be around mid-April on the other hand. On Hamas's side, the organization has confirmed that the ongoing direct channel with the Trump administration is continuing. It has also stated in the past several days that progress has been made on implementing the next phases of the ceasefire. The group has also reported that delegations have met with the Egyptian head of intelligence Hassan Rashad over the past weekend, and that advances were also made in discussing the future of the Gaza Strip. Regarding the hostage exchange in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, I'm also going to add that it's important to consider several different statements that were made in the past weeks by different Hamas officials. Currently, there are between 9,000 and 10,000 Palestinian prisoners within Israeli jails. 2 weeks ago, Moussa Abu Marzouk stated that the group is going to demand between 500 and 1,000 Palestinian prisoners to be released in exchange for each remaining live hostage in the Gaza Strip. That, I will say, will include all Palestinian prisoners in exchange for all Israeli hostages. In addition to that, Hamas's official representative of the Gaza Strip, Khalil al-Haya, also stated that the group is going to demand the release of all Palestinian prisoners in exchange for all remaining hostages in the Gaza Strip. The reason I am stating that it's important to consider these statements is that in one of his current interviews, Adam Boehler did state that he was right now negotiating the release of all remaining prisoners in the framework of the current deal. Now, he quickly corrected himself in that interview and stated that he's negotiating the release of all remaining hostages. However, when taken together with these statements of the different Hamas officials, I'm going to cautiously state that it is very likely that as part of these ongoing negotiations, Hamas is at very least demanding the release of all Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails in exchange for all the remaining Israeli hostages. That doesn't mean the United States has agreed to this, but that is one of the things that Hamas is very likely demanding. And at this point, it is possible that Boehler is negotiating this, waiting to give this demand at least to the Israeli government. Again, that is speculation on my part, but given the way Boehler quickly corrected himself in the interview, alongside what Hamas officials have said in the last several weeks, that is my assumption about what is being negotiated in those ongoing talks. Meanwhile, while these negotiations continue on the ground, the situation is in a bit of a weird holding pattern with regards to the truce between Israel and Hamas. While the initial deal between the sides stated that the truce will continue as long as Phase 2 of the deal is being negotiated, right now there are no official negotiations between the sides with regards to the implementation of Phase 2, and thus over the last week the truce is being maintained despite no official obligation of either side. Israel has stated that it will not continue to extend the truce endlessly without the release of more hostages from the Gaza Strip, and after cutting off the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip last week, today the country announced that it is severing the electrical lines transferring power from Israel to Gaza, effectively shutting down the one sanitation plant that is operating in the Strip. Despite these moves, neither side has made any concrete move to return to fighting, despite the fact that both sides are making continuous statements that they are going to return to fighting if negotiations break down. It is important to note that right now there are no negotiations going on between Israel and Hamas. In fact, negotiations are happening between Hamas and the United States, seemingly bypassing Israel at this point. So obviously it remains to be seen what will happen and what will lead the sides possibly to return to fighting, or are Hamas and the United States going to continue negotiating while the US seemingly tells Israel behind the scenes do not return to fighting at this point. Obviously it remains to be seen. I'll report more as things develop. That is my update on the latest developments on the Israel-Hamas war. If you find these updates informative, please do remember to send them on to anyone who you think might be interested in them. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.